All right, so let's jump into things here. So welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. For today's webinar, we're going to be looking at empowering HR to craft a culture of transparency within organizations. And so for those of you that we haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Scott Rust. I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. I think I'm jumping ahead here. Why don't we talk a little bit about intuitive performance? Just to introduce you a little bit to our organization. And so we really believe that, elevating team performance starts with understanding your people. It really comes down to, focusing more on the person behind the job rather than the job itself. And so what we do is we really help organization build out that peopling foundation within two pillars. And so on the one side, we have our leadership training and coaching. And so those things really focus more around, training development, which can range anywhere from a half-day session all the way up to some of our flagship leadership programs, which are really customized to your team and also to your workplace, recognizing that, having case studies and bringing in situations that are relevant to your team and what they're experiencing can really have a big impact on their learning and development. And so we really look at meeting your team where they're at, understanding who's in the room, and really providing them the tools and support that they can help develop their leadership habits outside of just the training sessions. The second pillar that we have is around coaching. Both myself, my business partner, Andrew McCabe, we're both certified coaches. We actually met through a 6-month coaching program. And so we offer that individual coaching experience that a lot of our clients and managers are looking for. And then we also offer what is called team coaching. And within team coaching, it's really based on this idea that, we've all been to that workshop, that webinar, that conference, and have come back with all these notes, all these different things we wanted to change and wanted to implement. And yet work got busy, things got in the way, and we kind of fell back on old habits. So team coaching provides an opportunity for managers to get together and to actually set commitments as to how they want to interact as a team, how they want to provide feedback to team members, how they can practice more transparency, authenticity, how they can have better communication. And it really creates that space to be able to reflect on how well am I doing, what can I do to continue to improve, and really helping kind of bridge the gap between knowledge and action within the workplace. And so for those of you that are Canadian or checking in, we are WEB certified in Canada. And if you're in the US, that we are also recognized through the WBENC as well for any supplier diversity as a woman-led and owned organization. Otherwise, a little bit of background on myself. My name is Scott Rust. I'm an ACC coach with the International Coaching Federation. I've facilitated and trained over 2,500 professionals over the past 5 years, and I am also the co-founder and COO at Intuitive Performance. While I'm not working primarily during the day, over the summer, you'll likely found me on my bike. I even have it set up here just in front of me for the winter months to kind of yeah, keep pedaling away when I'm not working. And otherwise, this used to be a picture of our puppy, but now we have a new addition to the family, Mila. And so if you do hear any crying or anything in the background, she's just letting her presence be known and kind of saying hello from there. Otherwise, in terms of our focus for today, what are we going to be talking about? I think there's 4 key takeaways we're really going to look to dive into. And I know, within an hour, things go by quite quickly. So we'll do our best to cover these as best as possible. And so the first one is looking at understanding and modeling transparent leadership. So looking at leading by example, fostering trust and openness. We'll also be looking at embracing vulnerability. So looking at how can we create more authenticity by acknowledging different challenges. We'll look at setting clear expectations. So helping guide growth through transparent benchmarks, specifically from the HR lens. And then finally, we'll also be looking at empowering teams through constructive conversation. And so that's really looking at cultivating a culture of continuous improvement through open communication. A few housekeeping items here, and just a quick hello to Hema. Thanks for joining us here as well. Feel free to use the chat as much as possible. I want to make this as interactive and engaging as we can. The idea here is, we want to be able to create a space for you to speak up, to be able to share your thoughts, your ideas, and get questions answered so you can walk away with actual deliverables to help support your team through the HR department. So if you have any questions, we're a smaller group today, so even feel free to just come off mute and jump in. I don't mind being interrupted. I want to hear from you and I want to ensure you get your questions answered. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat. In group discussions, if you've noticed something, what I would recommend doing is share from your experience rather than providing advice. And what that does is really creates a space that allows people to kind of take away what they feel is best fit for them, rather than hearing, hey, you should go out and do X, Y, Z. And lastly, if you need to step away, just drop a quick note in the chat. That's fine. I understand these things happen, and just really happy to have everybody here together today. Otherwise, I will just introduce Phoebe just in the background here today, helping me out a little bit. And so I know a lot of you may have registered through LinkedIn. And so if you are looking to get a recording today, she might reach out and just ask you for your email so we can actually send you that recording. And so if she does ask you and you do want recording or even get access to further webinars or resources, please feel free to provide it to her. Hi, Krista. Thanks for jumping in today.
Hi.
Perfect timing. So before we really jump into things, I'd like to hear a little bit from you as to, what does transparency mean to you as an HR leader? How might transparency show up in the workplace? What are the actions that you might be able to notice that reflect transparency? And maybe what's the impact? So I'd like us to maybe jump in the chat here and would like to hear from you as to how this shows up from your HR lens. I'll pause here for a moment, giving some people some time to type in the chat. So I know for us at Intuity, one of the things that comes up for me when I think about transparency amongst our team, part of it is just ownership. Being able to, have that clear and transparent communication around as to, hey, this is where I'm at with things. This is what's going well. And hey, maybe even this is where I've missed the mark. And so having that transparent communication, be able to take ownership over what went well and didn't go well, is one example of transparency that I've noticed within our organization. Otherwise, Hema here has opened up or has marked down here open communication regarding the state of the business. So communication is key. So I think you're talking a little bit more from the top down as to, executive and leadership communication, ensuring everybody within the business understands where they're at and where they're going. Chris is saying transparency is open communication, not being afraid to share the good and the bad, helping people understand the business. Fantastic. Sarah comes back again, open and honest communication, especially from the top down. Exactly. And I'm sure we've all noticed this, right? Like when open and honest communication or transparent communication is reflected at the executive level or at the leadership level, it makes it much easier for other people within the organization to do the same. And so we'll actually have a bit of a conversation around if we don't have that transparent communication within the team, like how can we actually start cultivating that? And what are some things that we can do to help build towards that? So thank you for your input here. Really appreciate it. And hi, Nisha. Thanks for jumping in today. We're just going through the first step. Step number one here, understanding and modeling transparent leadership. And so we're going to take a look a little bit around what is the impact of transparency in the workplace. I won't spend too much time on this. I think it's something that's pretty relevant for all of us in the room here, but just defining transparency first. Transparency in leadership is the commitment to be open, honest, and have clear communication in leading a team or organization. So it involves sharing information and intentions with authenticity and prioritizing that openness and accessibility to be able to have information reflected, especially information that requires or that has an impact on decisions, kind of disseminated throughout the organization. And so a few of the things, a few of the trends that have come up from research talk a little bit about, I think it's Forbes that said 50% of employees feel organizations are being held back from their lack of transparency. And so what we're saying here is that, if organizations were able to be more transparent, it would likely have a bigger impact on employees as a whole. They can tie the work that I'm doing into the actual impact at the end of the road. Furthermore to that, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a survey of 33,000 people across 28 different countries, resulted in 1 in 3 people not trusting their employer. So that's just like a kind of a big red flag. And I can imagine even from an HR seat, if you ever learned that we had an engagement survey and learned that your employees didn't trust your organization or your team, that'd be a big red flag of trying to understand, hey, what can we do to change this? And furthermore to that, HBR said, 70% of workers say that they are most engaged when management communicates openly. And so I think this speaks highly, to the when we're defining the impact of transparency, or what does transparency look like for you in the workplace? It comes back down to, that transparent and open communication is so key, especially from the top down, in helping support employees across the board. Furthermore to that, let's take a look at, a few of the ways of how we can actually adopt transparency by leading by example. And so we actually have 10 tips here around how you can adopt transparency by leading by example. And I'll go through them quickly. And what I'd like to do is at the end of it, actually hear from you as to which of these 10 things do you think would have the biggest impact for you and your organization? Or so as we go through, think about which of these ones, or even if it's a few of them that you feel would, help support your team better heading into 2024. And so one of the things we're looking at here is use clear and timely communication. Communicating information clearly in a timely manner is necessary. It helps avoid any delays in sharing important updates, decisions, or changes, helps bring everybody on the same page. Otherwise, even sharing the why behind decisions. When you share why decisions are being made, at least provide some context as to the reason behind them and helps employees better understand the thought process and really helps kind of promote further transparency amongst the team and organization as a whole. Another one here is admitting mistakes and learning from them. I think this was already said by, I'm trying to find it here, by Krista earlier around, sharing both the good and the bad. So really being honest around, acknowledging mistakes openly, demonstrating a willingness to learn from errors and communicating the steps that are being taken to help prevent that in the future. And so it's not just saying, oh, I made another mistake again, and you keep making the same mistake over and over again, which, we understand isn't going to lead to a positive outcome, but rather being able to share, hey, this is what I did, and this is how I can do it better. And so looking at it from the HR lens is, how can you help support your managers and team members feel comfortable in being able to adopt this within their teams? Otherwise, looking at maintaining an open door policy. So encouraging an open door policy where team members feel comfortable approaching their managers with questions, concerns, ideas, really kind of creates and fosters that accessible environment of transparency. Number 5 here is encouraging questions and feedback. So having that ability to actually have employees' voices heard, right? I think it's about a 4.5 times increase in engagement when employees feel they actually have a voice at the table. Now, that doesn't mean that, what they bring to the table or what they voice is going to be actioned on, but at least just this fact that, hey, I had a chance to offer what I had to say and to provide my feedback or my input can really help boost engagement and, is in line with our transparent behavior that we're looking for. Number 6 here is being consistent in behavior. There's nothing worse than being inconsistent, right? And kind of comes back to that idea of how can we build psychological safety? And so consistency is one of those ways we can help build that psychological safety so people feel safe in the environment and their working space that they're coming to. Number 7 is include others in decision making. And so again, coming back to the idea of having or encouraging questions and feedback is allowing space for others to provide their input on decision making. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to use their input, but it can help create more of that transparent work environment. Number 8, sharing personal perspectives. So actually opening up a little bit personally, especially with struggling, when you're struggling with something or have struggled with something in the past that somebody's currently struggling with, especially from a management perspective to their individual contributors can be really help build trust and helps create that transparent environment. Number 9 is provide access to information. And so looking at it from the HR lens is, how easy is information about the organization, where it's going, things that are really important to your team members, how easy and accessible is that information? And then lastly here, number 10 is acknowledging and addressing concerns. So when concerns arise, whether it be through feedback surveys, engagement surveys, whether it be concerns that are brought to you directly, how are you acknowledging them and how are they being addressed? And how is that being done so that, if you're hearing from one person, this is a concern, there's likely other people in the organization that might feel the same way. And so maybe not just addressing it for that one person, but looking at addressing it for the company as a whole. And so I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I'd like to hear from you. If you'd like to type in the chat, whether it be 1, 2, 3, whatever the number or amount is, I'd like you to type in just type in the number, don't have to type in the whole thing. Which of these do you think would have the biggest impact if you were able to work on it a little bit further heading into 2024 for your team? Is it, having more consistent behavior? Is it admitting mistakes and learning from others? Is it an open door policy? More timely communication? What might that look like for your organization? Krista says number 5, encouraging questions and feedback. I'd be curious if you unpack that a little bit further, Krista. So what do you feel would be the impact of having more encouraging questions and feedback from your team members? And feel free to come off mute if you like, or even type in the chat, completely up to you.
I think for my organization, because we're remote, people feel they always have the opportunity to ask us questions. We've done a really good job recently in having that open door and our CEO taking
Mm-hmm.
are doing personal meetings with people who have questions and want to offer feedback. So we're
Mhm.
getting better, but I think that's the one thing in 2024 that will help us the most.
Okay. And so especially because you're in a remote environment, having that space to encourage that questioning, getting that feedback from employees, just becomes that much more important. Oh,
Mhm.
fantastic. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
We have both Nisha and Sarah who shared number 7. So include others in decision making. And so I'm curious, is that looking at it from the leadership level where decisions are just being made and told to you rather than having, and maybe even unpacking this further, I'm curious if it would be more for team members, even for HR department in general, not being involved in some of that decision-making process.
Yeah, so I'll attest to mine. A lot of times certain decisions are made from the top
Okay.
and they don't necessarily involve other people in the decision making process. So sometimes when they roll out these ideas or plans, it really flops or it's not well received. Like, for example, recently we did a restructure
Mhm.
and got rid of one of our departments, but they never consulted like our compliance manager because that's going to affect our ISO certification, the decision that they made. So sometimes
Mm,
there's trickle down effects because they don't involve other people in other departments when it comes to major decisions.
okay.
Sounds
And
like we
so
work for the same company, Sarah.
Yeah, glad to know we're not the only one.
Nisha, you're saying you kind of resonate with what Sarah's saying about that
100%. Yeah.
top-down approach. Do you have anything else to add to what you had said?
It all falls back to, like Sarah mentioned, it's, leadership making these decisions and really not, getting each department heads to really comply with those decisions. And it basically affects the end users and how they're going to start operating.
Mhm.
Sorry if I'm whispering, I'm in a common space.
No, that's okay. No worries at all. Okay. And so I'm hearing that there's a trend here of, really the top level making decisions on their own, almost in a silo at times. And what happens is it can have an impact in other departments or have, I'm assuming, consequences that they didn't even realize. For your example, Sarah, I'm assuming they didn't really know the impact it would have on your ISO certification in making this decision. And so it was something that
Yeah,
they had to be reactive thereafter instead of being proactive and talking with everybody and getting more people involved in the decision-making process.
yeah.
Okay. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Otherwise, the next step we want to look at is looking at how can we embrace vulnerability in leadership, right? We've heard it left, right, and center, whether it be from Brené Brown or any of the other top speakers there, the importance of, kind of bringing in vulnerability in the workplace and also creating more of a space that people feel like they can be their authentic selves. And so we're going to be looking here at two specific things around, how can we connect vulnerability and authenticity together? And so first want to define vulnerability. So it really comes down to this idea around, the courage to be open, honest, and imperfect. So acknowledging uncertainties and being able to take risks despite those things. And then, so when we're looking at authenticity, it looks a little bit more around, being true to oneself. So aligning actions with the values and embracing one's uniqueness. So being able to embrace your own approach. And so the idea here is that, when we combine these two things together, it really creates a transparent environment where I'm able to be open and honest. And I'm also able to be true to myself in terms of how I'm feeling and what's coming up for me. And so how this can show up in the workplace is, an example could be even leaders being able to share their own personal challenges and how it's impacted work as they've gone through things. Vulnerability really helps humanize leadership and helps encourage that openness. Another example could even be a manager admitting different mistakes they're making in a specific planning phase of the project. So rather than placing blame on others, taking that ownership and what they've learned and how they can do better moving forward. And I think that's a big piece, especially for either new managers or even individual contributors. When taking ownership, it's also owning what I'm going to do next time to make sure it doesn't happen again and being able to stick to that kind of moving forward. And so I'd like to take a couple of minutes here and again, just kind of go through a little bit of group exercise together because and maybe I'll put the question out there. Either type in yes or raise your hand if you're on camera. Have you ever noticed challenges in helping leaders or other team members actually embrace vulnerability in the workplace? Is this something that resonates? Either type in yes in the chat, or even I think I see a couple heads nodding, And so it's this idea around like, okay, so if our leadership team is not able to embrace vulnerability or is not sharing decision making across the board, what are some ways that we can help maybe promote this, looking at it from the HR lens? And so I have 5 examples here we're going to look at. And so I'd like to take a look, or I'll bring up one example, like creating a safe and supportive environment. And then I actually want to turn it over to you as to, what are some of the ways we may be able to create a more safe and supportive environment within your organization? Or more specifically, what is one way that you might be able to create a more safe and supportive environment heading into 2024? To give you some background, some of the things that HR can do can be really fostering a culture where vulnerability is viewed as a strength rather than a weakness. So, this involves creating an environment where employees feel safe to be able to share their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences without fear of judgment or retribution. So things that you can do around that is, regular team building activities, having open forums and anonymous feedback mechanisms. These all contribute to creating that safe space. Another one that comes up here is looking at leading by example. And so, leadership sets the tone for organization's culture. So HR can encourage leaders to model vulnerability, by sharing their own challenges and learning experiences. When leaders openly express their vulnerability constructively, it can really help, again, lead by example, just based on the definition. Furthermore to that, even looking at providing training and resources can be a great way of helping support people in terms of like, I don't know what open communication looks like. I don't know how to be transparent or how to embrace vulnerability in the workplace. So offering training sessions on emotional intelligence, communication, conflict resolution can all be ways of helping support both your leaders and your team members from there. Number 4 here is promoting regular check-ins and feedback. So encouraging managers to have regular one-on-one check-ins with their team members, especially in a remote environment where we know communication can slide under the rug a little bit easier. And looking to discuss not just work-related issues, but also looking to help build that trust and transparency within the workplace. The last one here is recognizing and rewarding vulnerability. So from an HR seat, looking at ways of how can you develop mechanisms to acknowledge and reward behaviors that promote vulnerability. So this might include a recognition program, could be awards, could even be incorporating vulnerability as a valued trait in terms of performance evaluations. So recognizing these behaviors can really send a clear message about what is valued within the organization if this is something important to you. Any questions? I'll pause on this just for a moment here. Any questions on how you might be able to incorporate any of these 5 things in supporting team members to embrace vulnerability in the workplace? Okay. So the step number 3 that we're going to be looking at is setting clear expectations and benchmarks. So what comes up around this is, we're going to look at articulating expectations as being fundamental to fostering transparency. So why do we want to set clear expectations for transparency? Well, because it's really quite essential in establishing a shared understanding of what organization values and behaviors. It really helps serve as a guiding framework, promoting open communication, accountability, and trust within the workplace. Furthermore, it fosters a positive culture where everyone's aligned, leading to improved collaboration, reduced ambiguity, and a more empowered and engaged workforce. So I have an example here with the organization Buffer. And so, there are several companies that recognize their commitment to transparency, but one of them is Buffer here, which is a social media management platform that has gained quite a bit of attention for its emphasis on open communication and transparency in various aspects of its operations. And so some of the examples of how they've embraced transparency within the organization includes setting clear expectations related to transparency by implementing things like accessible salary policies, looking to have a transparency dashboard that provides real-time updates on various metrics, which includes revenue, customer numbers, and other key performance indicators, and their internal employee handbook is publicly available. And so these are some of the ways that Buffer has, really embraced this idea of transparency within their organization. And their commitment has not only influenced its internal culture, but has also contributed to a positive reputation within the broader business community. So other companies have been known to establish communication standards concerning frequency, decision-making inclusion practices, feedback processes, decision-making rationale. These are all the things we've talked about already. There are all different ways in which we might be able to practice these a little bit further. Looking a little bit further at this is, how can we actually set transparency benchmarks? And so let's take a look at some of the ways that we can actually set some of these benchmarks here. So one of the things that come up is around establishing those communication standards, looking at decision-making inclusion practices, looking at feedback practices, decision rationale sharing, and setback learning lessons. So, when there are setbacks, being able to talk about them openly and kind of bring them back to the table as to what you can do better moving forward. So again, these are all examples or benchmarks that from an HR lens, you can look at trying to establish a little bit further to help build more transparency within your organization. So empowering teams through constructive feedback. So let's be honest, constructive feedback, it's probably a webinar all in itself, not so much a section within this webinar, but I do want to offer just a few tips around how we can give constructive feedback, or more importantly, how you might be able to support your managers in providing constructive feedback when you might notice that, the feedback they're providing might not be landing with their team members. And so one of the ways we can look at doing this is by being specific and descriptive. So clearly articulating specific behaviors or actions that you've observed. So avoiding, just generalizations and rather providing concrete examples. And so rather than saying, well, I've noticed you're not doing this, like providing, well, in this situation, this is the gap that I noticed, and this is how I would have liked you to approach it better next time. And so this really helps employees better understand exactly what aspects of their performance or behavior are being addressed, making the feedback more actionable. And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking to do, right? With providing constructive feedback, it really is looking at changing behaviors. So instead of saying, you missed the deadline, being specific and saying, I've noticed in the past 3 projects, you've missed the deadline for submitting the final report by a week. And this is the impact it's actually having on the organization. And this provides that open and transparent feedback and communication. Next piece here is looking at focusing on behavior, not personality. And so direct feedback towards observable behaviors and actions rather than making it about individual's personality. It helps kind of remove things and makes it a little bit easier to be able to digest. And so this ensures that feedback is objective and tied to specific instances, reducing the chances of, recipients feeling personally attacked. And the emphasis is really on the behavior and the outcomes on team dynamics, on the outcomes of deadlines, and anything along those lines. So really helping tie it back to the why, which was one of the things kind of coming back to what's important about creating a transparent workplace. And so allowing people to understand why this behavior is maybe not appropriate, or what impact it might be having on the grand scheme of things that people might not be realizing. The third piece here is looking at offering solutions and guidance. So providing constructive solutions or even suggestions for improvement. So rather than solely pointing out what went wrong, offering guidance on how an individual can enhance their performance or address issues raised. I'd build on this a little bit further and even say, asking them first, how do you think you should address this? So taking more of a coach approach in terms of asking these questions, seeing what they feel would have the biggest impact for them, and then be able to course correct or offer guidance if you feel that what they brought to the table might not be a good fit, or maybe they don't have the experience and don't really know how to address some of the behavior or the issues that are coming up. And so being able to then provide them the guidance from there. So an example could be, to be able to help meet project deadlines more consistently, let's consider implementing a more detailed project timeline with milestones and deadlines. So rather than just saying, hey, the deadline is going to be December 20th, you can actually say, okay, well, if the deadline is December 20th, what has to happen between now and then to be able to get there? And what are some timelines or deadlines between now and then that have to be hit to ensure that we're set up for success moving forward? So I'm curious, taking a moment here, if you want to type in the chat, which of these do you feel might be challenges that you've noticed some of your managers face, or might have a bigger impact if your managers were able to, be more specific and descriptive in providing constructive feedback, focusing on more behavior, not personality, offering solutions rather than guidance. Which of these is a growth edge, might you say, for your organization? And feel free to type in the chat if you like, or come off mute and share. And I know we're a small group, so I won't try to push anybody to engage more than you have the opportunity to at the moment. So Chris is sharing here number 3. So many of our managers don't provide guidance after providing feedback. I can imagine the impact in those situations, Krista, is, employees feeling like, hey, I did something wrong. Now what? It really kind of leaves them in the lurch in terms of, I don't know what my manager is expecting of me. Might impact trust. And again, comes back to it's not very transparent as to setting expectations, creating that support, and helping kind of move things forward. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Otherwise, building on this a little bit further, I'd like to actually go through a case study and talk about a little bit more to help provide maybe just some guidance based on this case study that you might be able to take away for your team members, your organization. And so the scenario that we have here is, we're going to imagine we're a mid-sized company and we're undergoing significant organizational changes. I think somebody had mentioned already that they just did an org redesign, right? So the leadership team here is deciding to keep information of a merger confidential until a formal announcement is being made to all employees. And what's happened is now there's actually rumors and speculations that are starting to circulate, leading to anxiety and uncertainty amongst the teams. Now, I'd like us to think about on a personal level as to, how could transparent leadership have played a pivotal role in positively influencing this outcome? And so I guess the goal here is ensuring that, there's transparency amongst the organization and that employees and team members don't feel anxious and uncertain as to what might be going on, or especially in a type of situation like this, if I might even have a job moving forward. And so if the leadership team had implemented, let's say, early communication, a transparent leader would have communicated the impending changes earlier on, even before a formal announcement. Now, in a specific situation like this, where it's a merger, there might be some legal things in the background I can imagine that might be taken into place. However, they could, announce something a little bit more at a high level, that there will be changes amongst the organization, but then ensuring safety of the team members, ensuring, the positive scope of what's going ahead moving forward. And so we will address concerns before they kind of come up or arise, and taking a proactive approach could help reduce an anxiety and prepare employees for any upcoming uncertainty or changes. Next thing here is looking at contextual understanding. So, transparent leaders will be able to share the reasons behind these organizational changes, emphasizing both the strategic and long-term goals. So this provides employees with, context, really providing them a better understanding of what's going on. And again, coming back to that psychological safety. Furthermore, is having that open dialogue. So encouraging questions and feedback. So transparent leaders foster an open dialogue where employees feel comfortable asking questions and expressing concerns. And so when we have open dialogue or that encouraging questions and feedback baked into our culture, there's much more trust that's being built. And what that means is that if a leader comes back and says, I can't talk about this right now, however, I will be able to talk about it further at a later date, it's still, even if you're not answering the question, because this has already been baked into your culture and there's trust that's built there, that pays off, especially in situations where leadership might not be able to speak to everything from a transparent place, like in a merger here. And so I think that's a situation where it's really important having these things built in from the beginning, because it can have a long-term effect. And despite maybe not knowing exactly what's going on, just the fact that their employees trust their leaders or trust their managers can go a long way, especially in these types of situations. Furthermore, that is acknowledging challenges. So, having transparently acknowledging any challenges that might come up. And so, being able to associate them with the organizational changes that might be coming up or upcoming. Furthermore, that is looking at inclusivity in decision making. We talked a little bit about the impact of not having inclusivity and how there might be repercussions that we might not even know about. So looking at really having that inclusivity and having all partners part of that discussion to ensure that all the boxes are checked, so to speak. Furthermore, is looking at clear timelines and benchmarks. So transparent leaders have an opportunity to communicate clear timelines on what's going on and what can be expected for team members. And then furthermore is having those feedback loops, throughout the change process. Transparent leaders really provide the continuous updates on progress. So it's ongoing feedback loop that ensures employees are, informed about developments and, help maintain a culture of transparency. So finally here, the positive outcome could really be looking at, a transparent leadership approach in which scenarios, or which the scenario would likely lead to a more engaged and resilient workforce. So employees would leave this feeling more supported, informed, empowered to navigate these changes, and ultimately really contribute to a smoother transition and a more positive organizational culture. I know we've kind of breezed through today's webinar. And so as far as a few key takeaways that we've touched on so far is, really looking at navigating challenges transparently, empowering team members through constructive feedback, setting those clear expectations, embracing vulnerability, and even modeling transparent leadership. I have a few questions here I'd like to leave you with, just for more as food for thought, sort of example. And so as you leave today's webinar, I'd like you to think a little bit more about, what are you compelled to apply within your role heading into 2024? What specific areas of vulnerability can you foster or can you embrace to help foster even personal growth for yourself or authenticity amongst your organization? And then finally, what steps will you take to cultivate a transparent culture within your team or organization over the next month or two? And so I encourage you to think about these a little bit as we come to a close here. And